Hello, everyone. Giving like 1 or 2 more minutes for people to join, and then we'll get started.
Hello, also from my side, waiting for the last ones to join, and then we're ready to go. Excitement kicking in.
All right, I'll just get started with the welcome part already. So hello, everyone, and a warm welcome. Thanks for joining us today. This is the 5th event, actually, of our Beams Founder Event Series. So far, we've been talking about M&A, mostly about due diligence. So this time, the topic is slightly different. It's about compliance. Another use case for our platform, and an even more important topic for our co-host today, which is Kertos and its co-founder Kilian. So Kertos is a compliance management platform, and we'll hear about it in a second. Yeah, to be honest, compliance has never been my favorite topic. It used to feel like something, for big companies, but we do notice that things are changing at the moment. And most of you have probably heard about the EU AI Act, about NIS2, SOC 2 audits, and so on. And they're landing on the desks of founders and operation leaders now earlier and earlier. So we are really lucky to have you here today, Kilian, to help us make sense of all of these frameworks. So Kilian will give us like a 15-minute, more or less, deep dive into everything we need to know about those compliance and the mentioned frameworks. And after that, we have around 30 minutes for a conversation and a Q&A, where I will be guiding us through questions that some of you have shared with us beforehand, but also questions that we think, founders, operation leaders, like us all of here, probably like questions we all have on the topic. But this is really an invitation to you to ask questions in the chat. Miri is helping me to monitor the chat. We would really love to include all of those questions in this conversation. And before we get started, I'd like to ask you, Kilian, to briefly introduce yourself and the company.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jana, and also a warm welcome from my side. As already mentioned, I'm Kilian, one of 3 co-founders at Kertos. I used to be a lawyer working more than a decade in-house for various start and scale-ups. And I also have to admit, compliance has never been my favorite topic. And maybe that was one reason why I picked this one, trying to make not only my life, but the lives of many other people out there a bit better. We started Kertos about 4 years ago, really trying to build that all-in-one compliance platform based in Europe and also made for European companies, bringing together 2 worlds, regulation, so everything around GDPR, AI Act, NIS2, or the DORA regulation, which, for example, hits the finance industry quite heavily right now, which are standards in Europe and something that you need to be compliant with. And combining those, not only with a good platform, but also certification frameworks that demonstrate this trust to the outer world. So being compliant is one thing, but how can you showcase this to future customers, partners, or even your own employees by making your organization more robust? This is everything around ISO certification, SOC 2 reports, or for the automotive, TISAC. What we've built is something that combines all of those frameworks on one platform, is heavily integrated into the IT infrastructure, something where we see this huge enriching overlap with Beams as well, where you make sure to really bring together those informations, build a centerpiece of knowledge and transferring it into compliance context. And what that means, based on the different frameworks, based on the different challenges in 2025, we'll elaborate in a minute. But now handing back to Jana for a sweet and short introduction of Beams.
Cool, thank you, Kilian. So quick introduction of myself. Jana, as you already heard, co-founder of Beams, together with Miri. She's also in the call. Beams or usebeams.com. It's a SaaS tool insights platform where we generate deep tool usage insights. That means that we really help teams understand which tools are being used internally. Are they actually being used? What kind of permissions and data is being shared with those tools? So it can then help companies to, first of all, optimize their SaaS setup, reduce SaaS costs, and also ensure security and compliance. And lastly, it can also help with things like tool adoption and also resource planning. And the reason why we're organizing this kinds of events, because more and more founders and ops leaders are using our platform to get this quick overview of their tool usage, to cut costs, ensure compliance. And we want to have conversations like this one today to help you be better prepared. Yeah, and as you just mentioned, Kilian, where our mission aligns, the Beams and Kertos mission is really helping teams with compliance topics when it comes to tools and the tools they're using, helping to manage tools more effectively, staying compliant, reducing costs. Really glad that we're on this mission together. So with this one, I'm actually handing right back to you to give us a quick overview, of what's ahead for companies when it comes to compliance in 2025.
So, you all might be aware or should be aware of the GDPR and other regulatory requirements in Europe. Nowadays, the world is a bit more complex because there are multiple frameworks that apply even to smaller sized companies. And as Jana already mentioned, the usage of different SaaS applications, software providers, vendors, they are, of course, enriching. They support you in use cases and let your operations flourish, but they are also a security threat because they provide an open door, if you don't close it, for others to come into your organization, infiltrate you. And this is one thing the NIS2 regulation is also addressing. NIS2 can be seen as the cybersecurity moment of GDPR. So it applies to companies from 50 employees upwards or 10 million euros of revenues. And it demands from every organization a basic level of cybersecurity standards in order to be protected from outside threats. The reason behind is the European Union wants to make sure that even civil infrastructure is not a potential danger or a potential target for especially outside invaders. Imagine your daily groceries or infrastructure around traffic and mobility would be harmed from outside infiltration. And this nowadays is not just happening at the more central points of data sharing, of actions, but every single vendor can be a potential asset threat to a bigger organization. And this is why it goes down to even 50 employees plus. And it demands from you a basic implementation of the ISMS. ISMS is an information and security management system. A system itself, in that sense, is not just a software application. Of course, Kertos, for example, can be one part of your ISMS, but it's actually the sum of many things. A central piece of knowledge, policies that are being implemented, controls that mitigate risks, and other things. And one standard could be, for example, the ISO 27001, which is a certification standard, but also at the same time, something that is giving you guidance. So the NIS2 is directly referring to the ISO 27001, telling you if you want to implement an ISMS standard, you can maybe orientate yourself on the ISO because that's a good one to follow. Next to it, already the European AI Act, something that is likely in everyone's discussion nowadays. And again, it's a controversial discussion. Do we, for example, slow us as Europeans down? Do we hinder innovation? But on the other side, AI also provides a great threat to everyone out there if you do not regulate it in the right way. If the AI is the right way, that's something that's going to be determined in the future as well. But as of today, this is something that applies to also, again, almost everyone that is working with modern tooling, because it's not just for people that are developing AI, but it's also for everyone that is applying AI. And my basic example is always Notion. Everybody loves to take notes on Notion and use it as a collaborating tool within the organization. But as soon as you switch the button and use Notion AI, you already have AI right in the center of your actions, and you need to follow specific guidelines. That can go as far as using a high-risk AI usage model, which can be something, for example, if you think about HR processes. So you build a list of sick days within your organization, you combine it with salary information and other, for example, revenue or like reviews in performances, and then tell Notion, well, please identify the top and worst percentage of my staff, and please also draft a termination letter for the ones that are in the, lower part of the section. All of a sudden, you have a high-risk model that needs to be made public to the authorities. You need to register that one. You need to implement policies, strict guidelines on the usage. You need to evaluate this. You need to make sure that the impact is also registered. The decision-making process has to be made public. People that are affected by those decisions also have a right to get a transparent information that this was an AI-based decision-making process. So all of a sudden, the European AI Act is all around you, even though you're not even building AI, but you're using AI in a specific manner. And that one, step by step, is something that is hitting more and more companies in the European Union. First is the type of AI usage. Second, it's also about simply timeframes. So the first steps had already implemented from the 1st of August, for example. Everyone in the European Union that is using, providing, or building AI has to have trainings and policies and guidance in context of the AI Act. So basically, in 3 months from now or 4 months from now, you need to have first compliance settings implemented in order to help your staff coping with the European AI Act. In the end, it's maybe not as scary as it seems. And from a very practical guidance and perspective, even as a lawyer, you don't have to make it worse as it already is. Meaning, if you have a transparent approach, if you have visibility in the usage of AI, if you make sure that you evaluate this, that you kind of like have impact evaluations on what's the impact, the benefit, what could be a potential threat to the people affected, and come to a decision-making process that is transparent, can be documented, and then whenever someone is complaining, also being pulled out and shown to the public, there is likely something that's going to happen to you, as it's also a fresh regulation that also needs to kind of like settle in its way. Of course, there will be decision-making, court rulings and similar in the near future. But as long as you kind of like walking around with a specific awareness to the topic itself, you should be fine. So nothing to worry that much about, but just try to make not kind of like unguided decisions in the sense of, okay, I'll just get started and figure it out later. But yeah, that's bluntly speaking what the AI Act is about. And thinking of regulatory layers in Europe, we have on the next slide as well something that is around certification frameworks. So being regulated and being compliant is one thing. It applies to almost everyone in the European Union, especially with AI Act NIS2 and the GDPR. But how do you want to demonstrate that trust to the outer world? Since regulation doesn't know any certificates or similar, the private world came up with those trust-building kind of frameworks, and SOC 2 and ISO 27001 are two amongst the most prominent ones. They demonstrate information and security robustness, implement a specific layer within your organization, and that can be shown to outer asset partners, customers, or internal employees to make sure that you take this as something serious. There are new on the horizon, like the ISO 42001 that directly refer to the European AI Act. Within the expert scene, there's already a big discussion if that might be the new golden standard next to the ISO 27001. So there's a lot happening. It's not as much of a workload than it used to be, thanks to tools that automate most of the legwork, but it's something that is more and more considered. On average, it's a growth in between 30 to 35% in total ISO certifications year over year in Europe. So it's a direct trend that is reflecting the need for trust within those interconnected industries, and that's why the ISO or SOC 2 became so prominent. Maybe also as an insight, why is the SOC 2, especially in the US, so prominent? Well, it's an easy explanation. If you think of a country that has little regulation, there is a big need for certification because people want to generate trust layers another way. So Europe has the benefit of being better regulated, maybe a bit more severe regulated, but that also lowers the interest for additional trust layers. Let's see where this develops, but that is, for example, one explanation why Europe has not yet seen that much of certifications compared to the US, and why they established those self-made layers of trust. And that's one differentiator between the US and Europe as of today. And it can be seen also as a premium factor, of course. Being regulated and sticking to regulation might look as a slowdown for now, but it can be the competitive edge if you think forward. We, for example, right now within the space have a strong demand from European companies specifically requesting European service providers for a topic like compliance compared to US competitors that simply have a different edge maybe on things. And from there, what does it mean to you, and what does it actually mean for you as a startup? As said, in Europe, there's quite a challenge if you don't meet the basics, because you as a managing director, operational manager, are in constant threat that something is not working the way it should be. So it simply gives you a bit peace of mind to meet the standards in regulation. But it's not only a self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's something that helps you in various operational challenges. First of all, if you're a founder, sooner or later you will have due diligence processes, may it be from enterprise customers, investors, partners, or any other company that somehow want to connect with you or wants to work with you. So being compliant on an NIS2 level, DORA level, is something that is already mandatory for many companies out there. They just don't know it yet. By accident, had been doing this for security questionnaires, procurement processes, and the next step would simply be to enhance those processes by getting certified and demonstrating trust from the very beginning. Next step, I mean, everybody wants to work in a safe place, and safe today, especially in tech terms, does not mean workplace protection, but is the environment safe? Do they treat the data well? Are they within regulation? We always bring the example of, do you want to be Meta or do you want to be Apple? Something that's still within line of regulation, but something that might be perceived very, very different from the outer world. Rather good, rather evil, if you want to put it black and white. So that's something where you can also establish trust and position yourself as a brand as such. And again, it's not just self-fulfilling, but it's something that helps you guiding in especially stressful times, guiding in times where you have maybe a specific growth phase and things might fall under the table otherwise. So it gives you a guideline to follow. It builds a fundamental system that you can build upon, that you can scale with, and that can grow with you. So the ISO is being implemented by a company of 5 employees, but it had already been implemented by a company of 15,000 employees. So it can work in either directions. And I think this is also one important thing that we constantly are asked for from our customers. Well, does it limit me in my decision-making processes? And that's one wrongful interpretation of the ISO. The ISO is not here to give you limits. The ISO is here to make sure risk, first of all, assets are being identified. So what is my company all about? Physical assets, virtual assets, IP assets, anything that drives value and is also something that should be secured, because the next step is what risk does the company have? Likely they are connected to assets. How do I work with those risks? Do I accept them? Do I mitigate them? And do I implement controls to make sure I deal in a specific manner with them? And last but not least, giving, of course, guidelines and principles to the organizational staff, making sure that those standards are also being followed on a day-to-day life or business life. That does not mean that those employees can't go the directions they want to, but if they do so, they make sure that potential new assets are identified, new risks are being also linked to it, and you simply stay compliant and make sure your organization has a specific layer of robustness. And that would be things we, at least, I mean, there are many more, why it does make sense to be certified and take those regulations serious, to not just be kind of like compliant, but also more robust as an organization and ready for business.
All right. Wow, this was, I guess, the most crisp and concise summary of all of these frameworks. Thank you, Kilian. By the way, for the audience, we're going to share the slides afterwards. So if you want to read up on it again, you'll find it there. I see a first question in the chat. So again, invitation to everyone to keep them coming. Thank you, Mario. I'll get back to your question in a second. Just wanted to set the stage now for the second part of our session today. So this is really a Q&A session or an open conversation between Kilian and myself. I'm asking questions as or in the name of founders and operation leaders in startups and young companies that obviously want to be compliant and be safe and do everything as they have to do, but they also don't have the time or resources to do anything that's more than what is needed. So with this in mind, the frameworks that you just mentioned, and maybe we actually start with the EU AI Act because we've heard that we're probably all affected by it. What's your suggestion? How to get familiar with it? How do I get started? How do I know what really applies to me?
So yeah, I mean, first of all, if you consult us or work similar provider, I mean, it's very straightforward. For now, it's all about the basics that I mentioned, to basically have a bit of training for your staff. So that can be training videos, that can be policies that need to be read and confirmed, something that you should obviously kind of like somehow document. And it's simply a documentation of AI actions within your company. So make sure that if a new vendor is being onboarded and that vendor, again, Notion, for example, has AI usage as one feature. And if that's being toggled and activated, make sure that it's somewhere registered. So at least that you document what is happening. Essential piece of knowledge sharing should be the case. And to also have a basic evaluation of, okay, and I mean, that's not just out of regulatory interest, also out of business secrets. Do my employees know what they are allowed to share? And not only regards of regulation, but also maybe, I don't know, the last P&L and things that maybe shouldn't be shared because they could become public knowledge. Do I know what impact AI can have? Do I understand the model behind? Not everybody is educated in the same way. So simply getting the basics out and making sure everybody is aware of what they're doing and you are aware of what's happening in the organization. I mean, that's more or less the standard that should be applied. Of course, I mean, something of it, like some use cases can have legal implications. So as soon as you're within doubt, you should consult. On the upper end, there are the lawyers. On the lower end, there are service providers and SaaS solutions like we have that help in basic use cases. Again, Notion, you're not the first one to use Notion AI. There are standard policies. There are standard trainings to your employees that can be applied and implemented. And there's a standard way of documentation all around the AI usage of Notion. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, but it's more about, okay, how am I kind of like getting this quick registered and inputted. And of course, it differs. As soon as you have AI usage, which is or can be classified as high risk, you have further obligations. And high risk actually tickles very, very quickly or triggers very quickly. If you work in HR, if you have decision-making processes within recruiting, in review processes around performance. And if those inputs are then automatically transferred into a decision, like you are being declined, you are being allowed to the next interview stage, this is something that's classified as high risk, and this needs to be registered at the authorities. Not because they want to kind of like, all of them, they don't have the staff to kind of like review and evaluate all of those, but they want to put a specific pressure on you, of course, first to make sure that you evaluate what you're doing and make it transparent and make it public. Again, we also have watermark kind of like watermark implementation, meaning everything that's AI generated, every decision-making process that is AI based you need to make it transparent. Like if you send a decline for a job interview and that is not, I mean, the email can be generated by AI, that doesn't need to be kind of like do not need to make this transparent. But as soon as the decision itself is based on an AI model, you need to put the disclaimer in the email saying, hey, sorry, we have to say no. And by the way, this had been kind of like being driven by our AI model. And you need to link information about the context. Here is a link to gives you all the feedback, how we drafted this model, what's the base for the decision-making process, who is the one you can get back to if you have questions to it, if you feel that this had been an unfair kind of like decision, this is the person you need to get in touch with. So you have a lot of transparency that you actually have to provide and make sure to pass that on to the people affected. So it's very tough to say what are the first steps. I mean, first is get everything together, get an overview, put some kind of documentation behind it, and then try to classify the different usage of AI. As soon as you reach high risk AI usage, better speak to someone, because from there it gets a bit tricky.
Cool. So I hear awareness, first of all, being aware of what is being used, or being able to document it, and then educate the team is also what I heard from you before. Right?
Yeah.
Cool. I think this is a good time for Mario's question. He's asking, have you had clients already that were forced to disclose their AI models to authorities due to the EU AI Act and their risk classification? And how much friction does that create to the companies? How much does it throw a startup off course?
Yeah. Yes, we had those clients. Actually, I given the example that I just mentioned. It doesn't have to be that far away. Of course, as soon as you work on fundamental AI and fundamental models, you're also someone that needs to be registered. To be honest, the feedback goes down to zero. For now, the authorities are simply happy, kind of like in the sense that you make this transparent. They neither have the staff nor the knowledge yet to really dive deeper into this. Again, they're just putting that obligation onto you so that you make a educated decision rather than just starting to use things. And no one had kind of like discovered any major throwback in the sense of, okay, this had been registered. A week later, there comes a feedback mail saying, hey, you're not allowed to do that. Quite the opposite is the way. For now, it's just, okay, I'm registering this. So also if someone has feedback towards the authorities, they know who to refer to and get context. Again, the more transparent and open you are, the more transparent and open they are also to discussing this. There has never been an occasion where someone had been transparent about the usage, also the same in GDPR context. If you're transparent, if you share the decision-making process, if you came to a specific decision based on your interpretation of the regulation, there might be another interpretation on the other side, but it's a ground you can work on. It's a ground you can exchange the opinions upon, even though that rarely happens. But there has never been a fine, rarely being a fine appointed to someone who had been open about and had been transparent about, okay, I had the right to take this decision based on my judgment. If you have another judgment, okay, let me exchange this with you, and the same for AI in that case. So register, and so far you have been fine.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Again, the invitation, if there's more questions, especially in the EU AI Act, feel free to share them. Otherwise, I would move over to, and there's a thanks from Mario, I would move over to the certificates that you also briefly introduced us to. You already mentioned a bit, when the right time is to, or at least start thinking about them. What does the process look like? Like, how do I get ready for a potential audit? How does it actually look like from the inside for SOC 2 and ISO to get those certifications? Yes. So generally speaking, the SOC 2 is very US focused. I mean, it's a standard that originated out of the US. Different to the ISO, it's not actually a certification. I mean, that sounds like very geeky, but it is not it's a report. It's a report that it's being conducted that is following a specific kind of like rules and standards, but you sometimes are very flexible in defining those standards internally. So what's being audited, to what extent. So it can lead also to a bit of lack of trust again. So the SOC 2 is more flexible in the sense of first of all, there are two types, type 1 and type 2. SOC 2 type 1 is a review, an audit that's happening on the spot.
So one day an auditor comes in, you present everything that you've provided, the assets, the risks, the controls to mitigate those risks, everything around the policies. But you're also very flexible in what type of assets you show, what type of risks you show. Do you really do the entire scope around the entire organization, or is it just the software department or just the sales department? And based on that, an auditor conducts a report, and that might be applicable to SOC 2 or not, but it's a one-off. So type 2, for example, it's a monitoring report. So someone comes in, is monitoring you for 6 months at least, and is making sure that whatever you've implemented is also being followed for this consecutive time of 6 months, and not just, okay, we make the bride pretty for a day and then we forget everything about it. So those are the first types. And SOC 2 is an audit compared to ISO, which is a certification. So there's accredited auditors that come by and do a certification audit, which is also then leading to a certificate that you can use. Generally speaking, you first of all have to decide which one is the best for you. If you are US focused, SOC 2 might be the golden standard. If you're more working in Europe, the ISO might be the one that you want to follow. Next step is, what's the time frame? Do you want to get this, like, depending on your size, it might take even years. But of course, if you're just like 50 employees, you can do that within 10 weeks, can do that within 8 months. So how fast do you want to get there? By that, you can define the project scope and also the project steps. And from there, it's all about, we call it controls. So implementing controls. The ISO, for example, is breaking down to, on our platform, 120 controls. That might sound like a lot, but trust me, within the first day, you actually get the first 40 off. Then the second day, you have a few policies that you need to implement, but it's a step-by-step guidance that gets you from zero. Literally, I have no clue. I have no idea, to get all the content, you get all the guidance, you get all the policies, you get the trainings, you get supporting documents, everything that you need. And then this being taken step by step, identifying all the vendors. This is where we also integrate into existing DAS. This is where Beams, for example, comes to use. Okay, who do we use on a software base? What is with access rights? Does everybody has admin rights to, let's say, your cloud infrastructure? Maybe not a good idea. Things that we can discover, things that we can flag, and things that can be mitigated as a risk, in a sense, okay, revoke admin rights for people that do not need those admin rights because it's a potential security threat. And this way you get through the entire process and workflow. In the end, we also make sure that we organize the audits, stage 1, stage 2, and that we speak to the auditors, make sure to find the right time, the right setup, have all the documents ready, and simply guiding through the entire workflow. This is the first part. It seems like the most kind of like challenging one. And indeed, of course, getting from zero to a certification involves a bit of work, but it doesn't stop there. After the first certification, a year later, you have an internal audit, second year, another one, and the third year, you will be certified again and reviewed. And the auditors, they tend to get more and more intense from audit to audit, saying, hey, last time you showed me what you've all implemented, well done. This time, I'm going to check you if the implementation really works. Where are the evidences? Show me what has changed. How did you document that? Where are the records of visitors in the office? If you show me a blank page, I likely lose the trust that you're really following your own implementation rules. And it might look nice on paper, but you didn't execute it in operational day-to-day tasks. Meaning you get a standard set of controls to implement. You get all the necessary underlying content pieces. You get functions on the platform, risk management, vendor management, incident management, specific basics that you have to implement to make sure you meet all the controls. Next step is getting the auditor, making sure we have a sweet and fast audit with little to no findings. And the last step is keeping that compliance over time, making sure that whatever you've been drafting is also adapted, changed to the change. Again, where Beams comes in, if something within your SaaS landscape is changing, it needs to be recorded. It needs to be reflected in your compliance documentation. And if a year later you have nothing has changed, people become skeptical and will test you throughout. So those are kind of like the steps to get there. As said, it can be done in 10 weeks. Usually one person on the other side that is someone well-connected, chief of staff, chief operating officer, even like if you have the time, co-founder, managing directors, roughly 15 to 20% of the workforce for that time frame of 10 weeks will be needed to make sure we're connected to the right people, to make sure we get feedback on inside knowledge that we need to have, but also to make sure that you review specific content pieces. In the end, it's all about management buy-in and willingness to follow those compliance rules. If the management is not on board, the company will never be certified, so to say. And this is where we carry also our customers from 0 to 100.
Cool. This was really concrete and really cool. And you touched upon it. So let's deep dive just one more time into this in our shared topic, the tool usage. You mentioned things like who has admin rights. I mean, I guess first of all is what are we using? What are we also sharing with those companies? And are those tools that we're using compliant? Then you mentioned admin rights. Like what are other things one should look out for when it comes to all the tools we're using?
I think again, so it's not just like visibility, even figuring out what we're using, and then also the accuracy of, okay, is the one that, again, the people that have access, especially the levers, like how did we revoke the access? Is there a task kind of like step-by-step guidance for system owner, for IT admins, and to make sure that everybody who's leaving the company is also being included of the software stack. So that could be a potential threat. Then within those tools, did you implement, for example, two-way authentication? Do you have specific guidelines on password usage? So basic things that also ensure that not one kind of like loophole leads to a domino effect that all others fall. If you have access to a central piece of tooling, imagine Flag, you can kind of like get a lot of information from others. So every SaaS is the one door that can lead to that fall down of many others. So it's all about like accuracy, like really knowing what's being used, to what extent, what are the different rights. Then also double checking if those rights, not only from a security perspective, but also from a transparency into like, do people need to have access to HR feedback information of every employee? We had occurrences with customers that had shared email inboxes that were not shared with, legal at a good example that should only be shared with the legal team. All of a sudden, those were shared with more people than just the legal team, and everybody in the company had access to any legal request. Maybe not the best kind of like use of that inbox. So there can be many, since nowadays everything is so connected, all of a sudden you connect HubSpot. This is having access to your email inbox, maybe not just your sales-related inbox emails, but all of a sudden to other emails that might be rather personal or might have impact on other topics. So there is a tendency to overshare information in between all those SaaS tooling to make sure that you can, for example, automate as much as you can and so on. But it also leads to, of course, potential blind spots. And this is, I think, is also crucial to really dive deeper into the settings section and figuring out what does it mean in the overall context.
Well, yeah, you can go really deep on the tool usage and the setup, that's for sure. One more question from the audience, from Gorkan. He's asking, what does the EU AI Act mean for multi-country teams, or like companies with international or remote teams? Is there anything in specific we need to look out for there?
So in Europe, it's harmonized. So if you think about international, multi-country as being within the European Union, the rules are, as of today, the same. Then in the future might be further regulatory implementations on a regional level. So far, the European AI Act is the standard. If it's outside of the European Union, again, it depends on, first of all, where your company is located. so that you have everything around, the obligation hits where the headquarter is, so to say, and the obligation hits when people are affected that are also based in the European Union. In a sense that if I'm a candidate based in Germany and I'm applying to a job elsewhere, and this is an automated reasoning based on AI, I do have specific rights when it comes to transparency and others. Of course, something that is yet also not thought through the very end, how can authorities have even access to them? Maybe someone that's based in Brazil, China, can they actually be held accountable for that? But that's a different topic. It's less about the regulation itself, more about the consequences. So overall, I mean, it doesn't turn the needle if you also employ, I saw the second part of the question, and employ people from outside the European Union. It's not the loophole in a sense, okay, now I can transfer all AI modeling, all AI development to that one person, which is outside of the European Union, but it also doesn't harm you. That's more about then, again, data privacy. So, I mean, the GDPR and the AI Act are highly connected in the sense that the AI Act is regulating a lot about personal information, impact on a natural person. So that might rather be a problem around GDPR aspects. Am I even allowed to share and transfer the data that the person outside of the European Union is now processing? For the AI Act might not even be that one law that's applicable, but the GDPR. So of course, I mean, that's where it gets tricky. I mean, as said, 7 years ago, it was just the GDPR. Nowadays, it's everything that's being built on top of each other and next to each other. So it's sometimes it's hard to tell if that's AI related or if that's more related to GDPR and others. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for also sharing Gurkan or answering Gurkan's question. We have 3 minutes left. So maybe to wrap up one final question. We heard a lot about, how to go through audits, how to prepare. But if we think of our day-to-day business, how can we ensure or how can we include it in our monthly habits as we work in a team, not just for the ones actually going through the compliance check, everyone in their day-to-day work? Do you have some tips that you can leave us with for the end of the session?
I mean, to repeat it over and over again is likely the easiest answer. In order to create habits, you kind of have to do it over and over again. It becomes something of a typical task, especially, I mean, it's nothing, of course we can help, platforms can support, there are designated workflows, but building something like that in Jira, in other task management tools, Monday, Trello, of, okay, there's a new vendor, those are the 5 controls or 5 checks that I have to make. Those is a new software application, those are the 3 people that I have to inform. And basic standards that you apply will likely lead you to a next step of evaluation. And having this not only once, but trying to repeat this on at least an annual base is something that helps to create awareness, because it's something that happens over and over again. If you test a new kind of vendor, you might have insights for another vendor that you already had been using. And I think this is how you, on a day-to-day life, can make sure that this is being followed. So standardize things. And even if things fall out of that standard, that's fine for that moment. Don't worry too much about the details. Just get the basics right, have some kind of evaluation before you start doing things, and then you should be good to go and preventing the worst obstacles. And make sure to use large language models in order to get a quick feedback. I mean, you need to get a bit of understanding on how to prompt them, what the questions that you need to ask them. But honestly, they also have a good first feedback for you, what's maybe within line and what's not. Of course, disclaimer, no guarantee on that. But if you bring that all into a mix and document that, for example, just drafting a word, putting it somewhere onto your desktop, that might be already sufficient. Just try to prevent the mistake of just doing things as you get along, and have the basics of documentation and evaluating what you're doing right now.
Kilian, thank you so much. And thanks to everyone for joining and for the questions. I think this was a great little toolbox of everything we need to know about compliance. We'll share the recording, the transcription, also the slides later with everyone, so you can read up on it again. We'll also share, links to both of our products. Feel free to reach out anytime if you have further questions or want to connect. And with that, I'll say thank you very much and have a great rest of the day.
Thank you, Jana. It's been a great pleasure. And yeah, don't take it too serious, but make sure you get the basics done and then we're all good. And let's actually also make this a European habit. I think it's a standard we can all be held accountable for, but in a good way. Yeah, then I think we have a good, flourishing, compliant future ahead. Perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening. Enjoy the sun wherever you are, if at least you're in Germany. Looks very blue. Bye-bye.
Everyone, bye.